The static from the white noise sizzling in the back of your ear, a telephone ringing off in the distance with not a warning but a promise of the end, a quiet hum as soon as she appears and there is no chance of escape. One of the most definitive memories of my childhood was going to the video rental store with my dad after work, getting to browse the horror section, smelling that worn out plastic and cheap popcorn butter smell, running around that cheap and stained carpet as my mind's imagination ran wild, looking at all the covers of the movies I wish I could rent but was too afraid to ask about. Whether it was being overwhelmed by the number of Friday the 13th movies and wondering what Jason's trip to Manhattan was like, or being so perplexed by the possibilities of a franchise titled Hellraiser after seeing Pinhead for the first time, or seeing that iconic cover of the skull from the Evil Dead VHS slip, or seeing the cover for Jack Frost and saying this is not the lovable snowman I remember seeing on ABC Family. But to look through my hypothetical options for movies I wish I could have rented, I found myself so distracted by this picture of Naomi Watts, attempting to cover her mouth overlaid with a film titled The Ring. And browsing its summary on the back, I saw it was PG-13 and said, hey, I've seen PG-13 movies before. I love Jurassic Park, my parents let me watch that videotape all the time, and my dad let me borrow the videotape about another videotape that would haunt my nightmares for years to come and change my life. I really wish this younger generation got to have that experience. You can browse through hundreds or thousands of movies across any streaming platform, but you can get lost in these algorithms. You miss out on the experience of holding that movie in your hand, being surrounded by so many others with their own unique taste, all to share their own love of movies. And to go back home and pop on that VHS tape with my brother, we found ourselves so scared by that cold intro that we attempted to turn off the movie, yet for some reason we couldn't. I distinctly remember the power button not working on our TV remote or on the TV's language settings shifting to Spanish, as we were both in a panic trying to figure out what was going on. As we get into that crash zoom into our young victim's mouth before she suffers her awful fate, I yanked the TV cord out of the wall and we sat there gasping for our breath in a panic before we'd conquer our fears with a round two the next night, and my fear would only become more amplified and paralyzing as I had this big box TV on the dresser above the footboard on my bed, until I stayed up until 2:30 the next morning after passing out after exhaustion took over because of my fear of Samara crawling out of that TV set and coming for me after watching our videotape. It would be years later until I explored the Japanese film, gradually growing a deeper love for that film than the one that defined my childhood, and while I was intimately familiar with these sequels and prequel that existed for this franchise, as well as the books that helped shape the adaptations, I was shocked when deciding to watch the franchise in 2024 in its entirety for the first time, and realizing that there were 14 different films, and said, hey, this would be a great video. I mean, in half the time of the existence of the Halloween movies or Friday the 13th, the Ring franchise has been able to put out more films, but due to poor timing getting used to the process of making videos, the video fell to the back burner for that last year, meaning that in 2025, I got to revisit some of the films that I genuinely love, and others that are a sad reminder of how a beloved franchise can warp within itself and become a pale imitation of what it was, and, speaking of late videos, sorry for the delayed Halloween video. My name is James, this is Movie Good or Movie Bad, and to prepare for this video was literally torture. To watch this franchise twice, 2 years in a row, was a lot. I love these movies still as a whole. I love this franchise. I will be there to watch anything that Samara or Sadako star in moving forward, but the sharp decline that we have in this franchise from its very peak to its very bottom is stark. It is shocking. There are no films nearly as great as the 1998 film that everyone knows or its American remake. Seriously, it is hard to get into this franchise. It's hard to recommend these films. I do think they're still fascinating and interesting, otherwise I wouldn't be talking about them. But maybe the best thing I can do for you today is give you a brief summary of each of these films, provide you some insight on how they're made, tell you a bit about some of these directors because they're quite fascinating as a whole, also help explain how shocking the continuity is from film to film because there are multiple timelines here, and just give some honest thoughts about these movies. This was an undertaking again, so please grab a meal, get some popcorn, get a drink, just scroll your phone mindlessly while this plays in the background if you feel like it at some point. Oh, yeah. Because, yeah, this is going to be a very, very long video, and as someone who wrote the script, it is a very long video. It is by far my longest video. But if you do enjoy this video, please like, comment, subscribe, hit that bell, share your thoughts on the franchise down below or the movies that you've seen. I'd love to know if there's anybody else who's seen the entirety of the Ring franchise, because I think I'd be very, very shocked. And yeah, check out my other videos while you're also here. Follow me in other places. You get the idea. There are high quality video essays every week or two here. There's been a bit of a delay just because I've been very busy in my personal life. Oh, yeah. but I think everything will kind of even out moving forward. Now to start off, I think it'd be a really great idea to talk about the 4 films that adapt the original novel Ring. We have Ringu or Ring, the 1998 film that people know, the American remake from 2002 starring Naomi Watts, the 1995 made-for-TV Japanese adaptation that no one talks about, Ring Kanzenban, as well as a Korean remake of the film that came out in 1999, The Ring Virus. Now, while all 4 adaptations of Ring take on their own narrative liberties, frame Sadako and her powers in a slightly different way, and exist with varying degrees of success, it's important to remember how different the state of Japanese horror was before Ring and after Ring. Even when speaking on the book, from everything I can gather, it wasn't an immediate success in Japan because of a limited print run of 10,000 copies, which I can only find out about due to a post on the J-Horror Reddit subpage on a 3-year-old post from Wagamama Lullaby. I'm willing to take any pushback or clarity from anyone with differing information, but there really is so little history about this novel, and really just later bits of the franchise as well, or really the author of that original novel as well, Koji Suzuki. He's given a handful of interviews where he's fondly talked about how much he dislikes horror as a genre, although he's considered one of the most successful modern-day Japanese horror writers. I mean, despite Barnes & Noble's limited selection, I still come across the Ring novels pretty frequently. But it wouldn't be until 1993 until Ring would get an expanded paperback print run, which would then be followed in 1995 by the release of the sequel novel Spiral, or its literal translation name Razin, as well as the release of the manga series for the first novel, and then the made-for-TV movie on Fuji TV on a Friday night, August 11th, 1995. And maybe we should talk about the film's status as a made-for-TV movie, because I think that's so reflective of the early popularity of the novel not being nearly as big as it was following the 1998 film, and also the potential for a made-for-TV movie being comparable to the popularity of V-Cinema at the time, or direct-to-video films in Japan where horror thrived, including where Ju-on or The Grudge would have its start. And without the success of this television film, I'm not sure if there would be plans for The Ring to be filmed back-to-back with the first adaptation of Spiral. And looking at the greater context when examining all 14 films of the series, I think it's fair to say that Ring Kanzenban is by far the most faithful to the original novel to a potential fault. Potentially the biggest difference that people notice is the presence of a male protagonist, Kazuyuki Asakawa, who is only one of the 2 male leads in the entire film franchise and also is the lead character of the original novel. While it's been some time since I've read Ring, and I think Ring Kanzenban or Ring the Complete Edition is a fairly brief film at just 90 minutes, I don't have many thoughts about Kazuyuki as a protagonist. He feels like a standard character insert to help me understand the details of the story. When the decision for director Hideo Nakata and screenwriter Hiroshi Takahashi to come on to take on The Ring took place, they made a few key changes with Kazuyuki, most notably making him a woman named Reiko. Instead of being married with a daughter, she is divorced with a son, and while simple changes add much more personality to a character and add a richness to the themes, helping this transform into a film about how our mothers and our fathers are there for us and their rejection of these roles. And also that eerie tone that you associate with Ring, or Sadako climbing out of the well, or the television, are all inventions of the 1998 film. So not only do we miss out on the iconography that most people associate with the franchise, aside from our long-haired specter, we also get a film far different in feeling, almost akin to a medical procedural film without any of the strong scares. It's also a film with a low budget, a shot-on-video look at a higher frame rate that you'd associate with a soap opera or other quickly made television, as well as rapid edits, sharp angles whenever there's a moment of tension to indicate that you should be scared of this, with a film relying on the framing of this mystery as a medical mystery, or why did these heart attacks happen to young people, and not a spooky mystery, which is based around why did this tape kill people in 7 days, and how do I protect myself from this spooky ghost. It is a very similar narrative, but framed so differently, and overall a film that feels too exact of an adaptation to a fault, which is a great reminder that the best adaptations are often not exact to a novel, and really if they only had 90 minutes to tell this story, they should not have focused so much on heavily building up the reveal of the tape. Aside from this, the narrative is largely what you're familiar with. Kazuyuki learns of his niece having a heart attack, which I genuinely could not remember if this was the case or not in the American remake due to the ghoulish look of the victims' faces overshadowing any reports of their actual death, which yes, it is a cardiac arrest in those films. Kazuyuki realizes his niece had several other friends who all mysteriously died at the same time, all were at the same rental lodge, and all watched one videotape, and leading to Kazuyuki seeking out his friend Ryuji, a dirty pervert who makes jokes about assaulting women, who is very different than the Ryuji that was formerly married to Reiko in the 1998 film, who also happened to be a stoic psychic, and he is not a psychic here. I also believe that Ring Kanzenban is the only film in the franchise to feature nudity, where after we see Kazuyuki and Ryuji go on their adventure to understand the difference between the tapes, they learn Sadako was sleeping with her father, which is a choice, It is really odd and oddly leads to a man treating her father, Dr. Jotaro, to become actively pursuing her. And when he attempts to sleep with her in another scene where Sadako is nude again in the film, he learns that she is intersex, causing him to be the one to kill her. Now, for anyone who's not read the book, Sadako being intersex has never been explicitly mentioned in any other movie except for the Korean adaptation for the character Park Eun-seo, but is a key part of her death. Now, I do want to make the clear distinction that intersex people are not transgender, but often get grouped together in entire conversations online, leading to people believing that this is a choice to be transphobic, or at least discriminatory and in bad taste, which I think is very fair when speaking about how it's treated largely as a twist, but maybe something we should consider more when talking about this film is how Sadako is the target of violence because of her intersex identity, which might speak to the sad reality and lack of meaningful representation in this case, at least in some people online have claimed it to be now. At this point in the film, after all this, they pull Sadako out of the well, which, to be clear, there is a well, just not the manifestation of the well in the videotape that she crawls out of, and when everything appears okay, Sadako spawns once again completely nude and static and kills Ryuji, making her appear as more of an entity than she did in the original novel and beginning to form in a similar spectral way in the 1998 film. And maybe I should have made this much more clear here, Sadako in the novel and in Ring Kanzenban are not nearly as powerful as they are in other films. It's important to name that Dr. Jotaro gave Sadako smallpox, and due to her psychic abilities, imprints the ring virus onto a tape, causing people to lose their lives because of that virus, rather than her ghost-like presence killing other people. However, at the ending of this film, as well as the original Ring novel, there is still an ending involving the need to replicate the tape in order to protect yourself from the virus, and it's one of the most consistent aspects of all these films. And when I view this film on its own merits, it is passable. I think I view it so fondly for the era of television it was made, like its unique and distinct visual style and its really infectious, no pun intended, 90s synth score, making it a relic firmly representative of all the films being made at the time. However, there isn't much of an identity to the film. It is a faithful adaptation, like I said before, but this narrative at this tone is not given enough time to flourish in the ways that allowed me to connect to any of these characters or Sadako, and while Sadako giving a virus makes sense within the context of the story and it's technically a faithful adaptation, it's not all that visually interesting. It's a bit confusing what actually happens here, with the use of lighting and strobes, or even having the camera lean into being a handheld looking like a floating apparition, makes this all help overall and gives it some visual flair, but this still makes for a film that's not nearly as strong or notable in any regard, just notable for it being the first adaptation of a novel that helped lead to the J-horror phenomenon that we all are in now, and I think I'd comfortably give this film a 6 out of 10. Now let's talk a bit about the film that everybody loves, 1998's Ringu or Ring, a film that likely everybody viewing this video has seen or is familiar with, and one that's narrative I just explained through a much lesser than standard film. Not to retread territory that we've already been over, but maybe I should talk a bit more about the differences and how big this film exactly was. While at surface level, the decision to have Reiko pair off with her ex-husband, who she's cordial with, adds just fascinating texture to their relationship and adds a richness that we don't often see in similar relationships portrayed in film or television, or maybe even in the context of Japanese film. I don't really think I've seen a relationship like this before. And while some may think this is shallow because of it being reflective of the relationship with a man, but again, it adds a layer about parenthood that is all the more pervasive, especially due to the choice of Sadako's father killing her in this film. Ryuji is not a creep here. He is calm, he is cool, even in the face of Sadako near his death, due to his psychic and clairvoyant abilities being present in this adaptation, which is not the same for everyone who pairs off with their leads in these films, and stands to be a great foil to Reiko, and makes his death all the more shocking by the end of the film, especially due to his belief that he can protect himself. I guess we should talk a bit more about the contents of the tape, because in Ring Kanzenban, you get a big red floating orb through the sky, and volcanoes, and people standing and shooting dice, as well as Sadako's grandma talking to her, and stuttering blackness due to this all being from Sadako's perspective and her blinking. The Kanzenban tape feels like a pre-show to a haunted house, but the tape and Ring carries weight. It's reflective of the sinister feel of the entire film before it, and drags you even further down with no hope of escaping its abyss. There is so much less direct projection of a scary image and more of a hint at something more terrifying, like seeing Sadako's mother quickly cut by Sadako is scary. To see people crawling away from the aftermath of a volcano is more effective than actually seeing a volcano. The ominous tile man pointing to the distance adds a similar flair as well. It's also funny to think about the addition of the 7 days phone call being because of the film instead of an on-screen text message in the tape warning you that you have 7 days. It's remarkable thinking about how the narratives are very similar between these two adaptations, but framing the 1998 film as a supernatural procedural or a horror film with a mystery component adds pressure to this mystery. It makes you scared for Reiko, Kazuyuki's family family was such a minimal part of Ring Kanzenban, but here I'm concerned when Reiko's son comes across this cursed tape. The look of this film is just incredible as well. There's such soft lighting that contrasts so well against the film grain here, and also creates a shadow that hangs across every face, leaving you anticipating what is around every corner or reflection. There's also a natural humanism in the film that feels present. It's a lot more authentic when we see Reiko's niece and her friend. We see Reiko and her son fishing at one point, and despite the peace and serenity of that scene, we also hear that upsetting tone signaling the change of the days, reminding you that Sadako is waiting whether you're vigilant or not. And although Reiko and her ex are not comparable, simplifying aspects of the narrative and having Ring being about the judgment of fathers and the care of mothers adds a layer of sentimentality that makes the ending all the more strong. While the original novel was not a massive hit that some people view it as now, Ring was an overnight success, winning Best Asian Feature Film at the Fantasia Film Festival, instantly becoming the highest grossing horror film in Japan at the time, grossing over $1 billion the year of its release on rental, and most notably becoming a huge success in Hong Kong, outgrossing many American films, including The Matrix at the time of its release. And in terms of influence, it's the reason that there's such interest in Japanese horror globally now. Ring shows a level of restraint and psychological horror that mainstream audiences were vibing with in a brand new way, which makes me wonder if it's the progenitor for the elevated horror genre that we all find ourselves poking fun at now. Without this film, I'm not sure if American audiences would be interested in Ju-on or Dark Water, One Missed Call being imported, and I guarantee that they would not be watching any of their remakes years later, and probably also lead to the intrigue for the once deep cuts of J-horror to become more mainstream like Cure or Noroi the Curse. Ring is one of the greatest films of all time. My love and fondness for it has only grown with age. This is an easy 10 out of 10 for me. Considering my recent mention of remakes, maybe it's time for me to transition to a remake of This Tale of Sadako, a film with much more anticipation at time of its release, and that is the South Korean film The Ring Virus. Wait, what? You thought I was going to talk about that other remake? Well, let's save one of the best for last, because The Ring Virus is a horrendous film that only exists for one of the most questionable and hilarious reasons of all time. If you are blissfully unaware, Korea and Japan have not gotten along for a very long time. It's essentially led to Japan occupying Korea from 1910 to 1945, which also led to the ban of Korean art being exported into Japan, as well as attempts to suppress other forms of Korean culture, the language, and its broad history. When World War II ended and Korea received their independence, they actually said, "We want to do the same to you all, let's ban the importing of Japanese goods," which would go on until 1998, largely due to the interest in Japanese pop in Korea and the recognition that the relationship between the two countries had drastically changed over 50 years. Now, picture this. Ring comes out in January 1998. Everybody wants to get a piece of that and check out the movie, except there's no way to have the film legally play in South Korea. At the time, the solution to this was making a Japanese and Korean co-production of the film that wasn't too concerned with being a reinvention or just retelling of the same movie, even borrowing shot for shot in some places and following most of the major story beats. And forgive me if at any point you're seeing footage from other Ring movies or parody sketches or interviews online. The Ring Virus has been taken off frequently from YouTube, and I fear clips are at the same risk. It's funny that whoever has the rights about the film cares about it as deeply as they do, because it's remembered so infrequently. The cultural ban in South Korea was lifted in 1998, and the Ring Virus was near the end of production, so it could not be cancelled, and after its June release in 1999, they made the decision to release the 1998 film that was much more fondly remembered in December that year in South Korea. Now, this might be a great time to explore the topic of how can two adaptations so similar in tone, style, and narrative be received so differently, because we see it all the time as we compare and contrast various adaptations that exist. I believe that some of this was clearly the intention in this case. There's a vast difference between adapting a novel and wanting to make a film strong in its own identity and creating a remake of a film that is at times just a recreation of an already existing movie. There are of course differences in names between our characters. Instead of Reiko or Rachel, we have Sanju. Instead of Sadako or Samara, we have Unsu, as well as an iteration of the tape, again much more faithful to the novel's version, with the associated message about dying in 7 days. Instead of Ryuji being a friend or ex-spouse, we have Choi Yul, who is the pathologist who does the autopsies on the teenagers who die, which is a baffling narrative choice considering that this character is once again a massive creep like the Ryuki that we see from the book, and a character where it makes little little to no sense for him to join along on this journey, and his death is played out in a scene that has little to no impact or weight. Assessing the film for what it is nearly 2 hours long despite covering little new ground compared to the 1998 film, and continuously feels sluggish, struggling to maintain its pace or intrigue, devoid of any tone or mystery, and because of its structure, I often question this adaptation's ability to trust its audience. The film's inclusion of the written message within the tape had already existed previously in the book and in the first film, but removes one of the greatest additions of the 1998 film. It's really key how that atmosphere of the film is so central to its success, and to have none of that here, despite being so narratively faithful, takes a remake of a 10 out of 10 movie and makes it a 3 out of 10 movie. Finally, we get to talk about one of the films that made me into the horror lover that I am today, 2002's The Ring. Now, I do know deep down the American remake of The Ring is an imperfect retelling of the film it is remaking, but I think it has some unique flourishes that have made the film stand the test of time and have it be remembered as fondly as it could be. Starring the lovely Naomi Watts coming off a very recent Mulholland Drive in a film that could have almost been directed by David Lynch, I've seen his name thrown around there quite a bit when speaking about the film due to his already existing relationship with Naomi Watts, but I don't really know where these conversations went. But it's funny to me thinking about executives at Paramount seeing Mouse Hunt and saying, you know what, let's get this guy to direct The Ring, which ultimately was the right choice and led Gore Verbinski to have a mostly solid career in Hollywood. It's fascinating to compare the differences between this American film and the Japanese film, which in many ways, these films are two peas of a pod, two different ends of the same coin, and have mostly the same narrative beats. Maybe a controversial statement, but instead of Reiko, we have Naomi Watts as Rachel, who is one of the most refined characters in the entire franchise. Because Americans are not very smart and need the majority of their thematic content spoon-fed to them in exposition-heavy dialogue, which means instead of getting a similar character Reiko as some form of character insert, Rachel gets expanded characterization to make up for it. She's a woman who is icy and on edge early in the film in a scene where we see her speaking about her son Aiden, who also refers to her by her first name. There is lots to gain here from this scene. It's possible that Rachel's demeanor is shaped by the loss of her niece, which is by far the most pronounced in the entire series. And with an actress like Naomi Watts at such a command, it's hard to feel as equally saddened as you are horrified by the loss of her niece, who, like I said before, dies in a ghastly looking way. It's named as a cardiac arrest, but she looks like Gollum with her face stretched out. Rachel's character might also be just distance from the idea of motherhood, a key theme present in the previous film, but so core to our dynamic with Aiden, which I really love this family drama element being so emphasized here, which also is just a sharp contrast to Samara being killed by a mother who wanted her more than anything but betrayed her. I care far beyond more for Aiden than any of his analogs in the previous films, and to add the psychic link to the world through Aiden also adds a further richness to this family, which sure leads to Noah being a dopey, argumentative, combative tool in so many different ways. It also makes his death more tragic than anything, but also gives a sense of urgency with Samara that's hard to ignore. I actually felt this pressure on the clock winding down with time that's never been felt as intensely as the other films. A funny addition to this film for sure is making Samara's mother, Anna, a horse breeder, for the sole reason of having an intensive horse scene where it jumps off the ferry, which makes me think about how the American remake takes this subdued and subtle, grounded approach to the 1998 film, one that feels like it could happen to you or I, and immediately translates it into a film that feels like it could be based on a nightmare of the otherworldly, even sickly, leading to every location and building we stumble across to feel decayed or apocalyptic for most of its runtime. The use of a green filter also adds to that atmosphere when watching the film. We actually learned was shaped by the use of a green filter in the camera, committing to the look of the film early on without the need for digital color correction, which to me is an issue plaguing the last entry of the American films. And coming back into speaking about The Ring and comparing it to the 1998 film, it's just a movie that pushes its theming to the side to be louder, to be more abrasive, to be as terrifying as it can be. It's not a shock how different some of the ideas can be conveyed when expanding a $1.5 million movie that is The Ring and expanding it to a nearly $50 million film, and there was a lot riding on it. There was also a unique and fun viral marketing campaign surrounding the film, including apparently playing full copies of the cursed tape on late night television the summer before the movie released, without any context of what the audience was seeing or even just leaving VHS tapes that included copies of the cursed tape on people's cars, at sporting events, at concerts, and there's even some really fun accounts of people on Reddit talking about how they saw these tapes and they were so freaked out that they got rid of the tape, and now they're huge fans of the film. It's the one film on the planet that as a remake I may say is an equal quality as its original film, even though they both present their stories in such different ways, with varying emphasis on themes, even channeling a unique visual style and atmosphere. I don't fault anybody for preferring one or the other, and I think I can easily give this film a 10 out of 10, and that might be controversial, but I still love this movie. Entering the next portion of this video, which is already becoming much more lengthy than I planned, I think there's a couple of ways to actually navigate this. I feel like some people might feel the need to tell the story of these films chronologically, but I think that gets a bit confusing considering the continuity jumps between film to film to film. Some filmmakers felt more inclined to adapt sequels to other films, etc. Some of them want to restart, and it leads to a very confusing time watching these films continuity-wise, because you can watch something in 2019, and all of a sudden that film is no longer canon to the film in 2022 or the film that came before it. So for people who actually haven't seen these films before, I'm going to do something a little bit shocking here. I'm going to break down these films by continuity, break them down by timeline, and explain how they connect to each other, especially when some are sequels to each other. This means that we might be jumping from 1999 to 2012, and then all of a sudden we're going back to 1999. It looks very weird on paper, but trust me, this will help you understand the sequencing and narrative structure of these films so much more, especially as they get so much more convoluted. Of these timelines, we have the Spiral timeline, which attempts to take time to build a trajectory around the series of sequels that adapts other novels in the series, which start with the often forgotten sequel to Ring, Rosin, or Spiral, depending on if you look at the transliteration or not, that was filmed back to back with the Ring back in 1998 and adapted from the second book of the series, followed by Sadako 3D and Sadako 3D 2, which both take their time to adapt as the fifth book of the series. And no, this is not book good or book bad. I have sadly not read the other books beyond the first except for Birthday, which was a prequel book in the series, so I can't offer in-depth analysis around these later films as adaptations. We also have the American continuity for these films, which follow Rachel and Aiden again with the Ring 2, and was sadly followed up in 2017 with Rings, a film that borrows the same imagery and has some level of continuity, but also severely retcons much of those original two films to its detriment. There is also the established continuity of Hideo Nakata, original director for the 1998 film, who'd come back to the franchise for several installments, including Ring 2, a direct follow-up to the beloved film that didn't necessarily follow Rosin or Spiral. He almost came back to adapt Ring 0, a film reflecting on the past of Sadako while she was still alive, and much more recently released the film Sadako, which came out in 2019 and attempts to bring the series to a near conclusion, adapting the series' final and sixth novel, Tide. And then we also have Sadako versus Kayako in its own timeline, separated from the continuity of other films, and the other most recent film in 2022, Sadako DX, only sharing continuity with that first Ring film. Anyone familiar with the horror genre may already understand that some of the biggest horror franchises navigate establishing new timelines and continuity depending on what creative forces behind each film want the audience to resonate with. There's a reason that Halloween H2O and Halloween 2018 each had different opinions about whether or not to canonize Halloween 2 within their stories, and that's because of the importance of the filmmakers about if Michael was Laurie's brother or not. And honestly, there's a multitude of reasons explaining why there are different continuities here. Hideo Nakata likely wanted to maintain the purity of his vision coming back for Sadako, and I assumed mixed to negative reaction as the series went on made filmmakers go back to the drawing board and start anew. With that brief overview, let's talk about the Spiral continuity of films. A detail that I've neglected to share until this point about Spiral is not only was it filmed in succession with Ring in a back-to-back production, but was also released the same day as Ring in Japan, which, you know, isn't the most shocking quality overall. In Japan, it's much more likely for a film of the horror genre and anime to be released as a double feature, not absolutely every single time, but sometimes it does happen. Some of the notable Studio Ghibli films have been double features, some Digimon movies have been double features, it happens. The film was written and directed by George Ida, who honestly doesn't have too much of a notable career outside of this film. It may be wildly upsetting for you as the viewer to know this, especially coming across this video. I can't come across many details about this film's production, other than it was made in conjunction with Ring, which sadly happens as a lot of films are made outside the US, that if they don't have a notable physical media release or even fans within its own country, then details get lost to time. And alongside that, it's hard for me to find any hard or concrete box office numbers, and this is often the case for outside the US before 2000, unless we're talking about any large blockbusters. Because of that, it's very hard to determine how successful Spiral was at all with a quantifiable number, other than we know that it made considerably less than Ring. It released on the same day as Ring, and that didn't cause it to grow at all in popularity, and the fact that, you know, it was so bad or received so poorly or made such little money, they said, let's make a Ring 2 the following year and just ignore this film in its entirety, even including and repeating some aspects of its story for its sequel. For those unfamiliar with the film opens with the body of Ryuji being examined by medical examiners, including pathologist Mitsuo Ando, or our protagonist for this film, which leads to the discovery of a cryptic letter, shortly followed by understanding of the cursed tape existing and the sudden deaths of Reiko and Yuichi, Reiko and Ryuji's son. Before the events of the film, Mitsuo's son has previously passed away, and because of the belief that Yoichi is providing him clues, he decides to watch the tape himself and go through a similar ritual that we've seen in the first film. Also on this journey, we have Mai Takano, who while previously was in Ring, has little significance to the plot other than being Ryuji's student and girlfriend. What's genuinely a bit odd here and what makes the summary of the film a tad bit difficult is the fact that lots of this film, including well past after the first act, is dedicated to characters explaining to each other the plot of the first movie Ring, leading to lots of flashbacks, a movie released on the same day that I'd rather be talking about, and I can't imagine the audience member that stumbled into this was bored out of their mind and just somehow never came back to Ring because this movie was that boring. We then are introduced to Reiko's boss, who for some ungodly reason not only has the tape I mentioned before previously, but also Reiko's journal, revealing that copying the tape from the previous film did not actually stop the curse, and Yoichi still died of a heart attack 1 week after viewing it. And yeah, Reiko's boss happened to watch the tape and he dies. That happens too. Mitsuo destroys the tapes to make sure that no one else is harmed, and then sleeps with Maya after sharing about his son's death, and then crashes out when imagining being alone. There's a discovery then that Reiko's boss's virus does not match that of Ryuji or Yuichi, which is followed by Mai going missing and Mitsuo questioning if the curse was ever real, and then this part is a little hard to follow, so please bear with me for one moment, but Mai reappears dead, seemingly having given birth, and when Mitsuo comes across another version of Mai, learns that she is in fact Sadako, who makes the point of naming that she's intersex, providing insight into Ryuji actually helping Sadako and the curse no longer being transmitted through the cursed tape, but actually Reiko's diary. Sadako is so grateful for Mitsuo's help that she brings his wife and kid back to life, and the movie ends. Spiral is also a far more complex film than Ring, and while I can't guarantee that this can be gathered by my synopsis, it's also a film that's caught within its own procedural lens, recognizing it could have an audience that did not see Ring because of their same-day release, and whether this was a calculated business move or done due to artistic differences, Spiral is far more concerned with being a faithful adaptation, not just narratively but also in tone, making it at times feel more at home as a sequel to Ring Kanzenban, as it focuses on being a much more medical procedural rather than focusing on these supernatural aspects, leading to a film that feels tonally at odds with its previous film, but also one that feels wildly out of line with what audiences were likely expecting as a sequel to The Ring. And a film that's just not interesting. I mean, the movie is boring. It's inoffensive, but just so boring compared to anything else that follows it. Mitsuo has tragedy shaping his character, but he's largely one-dimensional. And Mai is so secondary and only exists to bring on this reincarnation of Samara. She only exists as a plot device. There is no tension, there is no atmosphere, not much happens. It's just explaining this past movie, and it doesn't know how to lean into the mystery when it's primarily a mystery film. It's very watchable. I don't think it's a bad time, but again, so little can be said here because nothing sticks out, and again, it is boring. There are very few qualities that make this film stand out at all. Our main character here is hilarious to poke fun at, but that speaks to the ironic enjoyment of watching the film rather than the enjoyment itself. It's very easy to describe this film as a nothing movie. There's not really much here, and I think because of that, I'd probably give this a 4 out of 10. Again, we're not covering these films in chronological order, so we're actually jumping to 2012 and 2013 to talk about Sadako 3D and Sadako 3D 2, which weirdly only one of these films takes advantage of its format in the most annoying and obnoxious way humanly possible, and it's oddly the first one in the series. Sadako 3D was made 7 years after the previous Ring film, the Ring 2, the American sequel, and 12 years since Ring's 0th birthday. In the case of why this film was made, it was made in conjunction with the novel that it was adapting, or the 5th film of the Series S. And what I assume is a poorly translated press release I found floating around the internet, which I don't really know how much of this we can trust as a resource or a guide, but it is what I'm finding online. It seemed that Koji Suzuki wanted to work on another screenplay for another adaptation of Spiral in 2006, and Hideo Nakata thought about coming back to adapt Loop, the 3rd book in the franchise, the only book that's also never been adapted to film, likely due to it featuring virtual reality, and turning the events of the first 2 films existing within that virtual reality, including Sadako before the virus comes to the real world. While having not read the book, it's clear that looking at this from a conceptual and narrative standpoint, I think this would be a very challenging film to adapt for a mainstream audience, not considering from a form standpoint, but considering the fact that it makes everything that we've seen before not canon. Sure, it makes it a bold reboot point, but I think it doesn't work for a general audience unless you have someone who's very tuned into what these Ring sequel books are. And I also simultaneously hope that some director in the future is bold enough to try to adapt Loop. Sadako 3D would also be directed directed by Satomu Hanabusa, a director mostly known for high school slice-of-life comedies, and that type of fare would make up most of his most recent filmography as well. And remembering that these films are not nearly as popular as earlier entries, I will try and provide as thorough and concise as a summary as I can here. The film begins with a cold open featuring a man dressed in white, dressing a woman with long hair in a nightdress down a well, before we quickly realize that there are other women also down inside this well. If it wasn't clear, the hokey 3D shenanigans have already begun. It is 13 years after the events of the first film, and after two people take their own lives, Detective Koiso learns of a series of deaths involving a mysterious video created by an online artist, Kashiwada, and a voice that says, "You're not the one." We then jump to Akane Ayukawa, a school teacher of one of the young girls that's died before, who uncovers a friend of this student, Risa, attempted to watch the cursed video on the website, but appears to be deleted online, but in reality is giving an error 404 message when the viewer attempts to see the video if they're not alone. Now, the curse plays out very differently in this film, but when Risa is alone, the video plays showing Kashiwada getting attacked by the long-haired woman, and as the video ends, hair shoots out the computer screen and Risa is attacked, only to be saved by Akane, and for Akane to be told that she is the one. It is then made clear that Akane has psychic abilities, and is then revealed that her boyfriend is Takanori Ando, the son of Mitsuo from Spiral, and that is the only explicit way that these films are connected. I saw these films twice, and I did not pick up on this connection because 1, I did not care about Spiral, and spoiler alert, I also do not care about Sadako 3D or Sadako 3D 2. Akane now finds her as the target of the long-haired woman, being attacked by multiple screens inside and outside of her home. At the same time, our detective from before becomes a believer after the death of his partner, and then learns when investigating Kashiwada's apartment that he's been attempting to resurrect Sadako as a punishment against the world for being a little too mean to our little boy, initially throwing long-haired women down a well, before realizing a cursed tape was needed to find the perfect host, who is Akane. Koiso and Akane join forces to go to Sadako's old home, but it is now a mall built next to a well for some reason, and inside a bunch of imperfect Sadakos, or spider-like Sadako creatures, attack Koiso, while Akane uses her training from the Metal Gear Solid franchise to sneak by undetected. Akane then discovers her boyfriend, who is dead for all of Spiral by the way, inside of a cell phone, and then when she realizes she is swarmed by Sadakos, her fear creates a telekinetic burst which saves her, and turns them all into Thanos dust.
Yo guys, it's me, Charlie. Hey, did that guy just turn into sand?
Yeah, what was that?
The real Sadako appears, causing Akane to suggest a deal trading her life for Takanori's, which is accepted and causes Akane to become overwhelmed by Sadako's hair. Takanori then breaks the cell phone, and Akane lives with him happily ever after, until the next film released just a year later. In this film, essentially Akane and Takanori have a child, and after a shocking and seemingly random cold open with a pair of scissors that I can't show here, we now see that Akane and Takanori's child, Nagi, is being raised by Takanori's younger sister Fuko, after the death of Akane during childbirth. Nagi has a tendency to isolate herself, drawing strange pictures and be near people after they take their own lives. This comes to a head when one of Nagi's friends, Yuna, pokes fun of Akane dying, causing this young girl to end up in a river dead. It then becomes clear that the deaths of many have been foreshadowed in Nagi's drawings, and she believes that everyone will die, including her psychologist. Detective Koiso appears back on the scene, investigated by Detective Kakaguchi, explaining that this is all linked to Sadako before his wheelchair slips down the stairs. Fuko decides to go to prison to see Kashiwada, who I forgot both times when I was watching the first film, as he's going to be executed for taking the lives of literally dozens of long-haired women, and also describes himself as a fan of Nagi, and then revealing to the audience that she is really Sadako's child. All this leads to Fuko seeing Takanori, who reveals that Akane is alive and in a coma, but she can never meet Nagi, or Sadako will reincarnate, and shares that Nagi is not responsible for the deaths. And now we reach an even more convoluted portion of the film where Fuko realizes that Nagi is missing, Takanori finds her in the hospital, and he'd been attacked by Kakuchi because the scissors lady from before was his wife, and they're all affected by the current curse. Nagi tries to see her mom, Akane is shot by Kakuchi, who then takes his own life, and then the room fills with blood. Fuko's love saves Nagi, and then in the most questionable direction that this film could possibly go in, we learn of a woman that's been corresponding back and forth with Kashiwada's landlord, the artist who made this new cursed tape, and then inexplicably learn that Nagi is not Sadako's child, despite everything that we just experienced within this film. And now that you understand the majority of what takes place in these films, the Ring franchise has a clear identity crisis that it never recovers from, lasting the majority of its film franchise, and when I reflect on every film made in this franchise from the 2010s and beyond, there is a clear loss of identity for the most part. On one hand, they're adapting the far more out there and complex sequels, but also Sadako becomes reduced to a simple ghost scheming from afar without a sense of personality or characterization. And sure, technically Sadako is not here. We just get a spider creature for that first film, and it's a cool creature, but there's little of substance connecting me to the film. Near immediately, there's an immediate void of tension and atmosphere. There is such an intention of hiring a director to capture the large ensemble feel of members of a high school, but that is beyond secondary to this killer video killing everyone around it. The film had absolutely no idea how to wield the horror of Sadako, being unable to take itself seriously during any of the moments where she springs into action, and also because Sadako is reduced to a haunted house ghost, you get a film with mostly cheap jump scares and the mythology of characters mattering very little, which has never been the case for the novels no matter how much they jump the shark. It's just perplexing thinking of a film in 2012 so caught up in the trend of using 3D film, which I guess was still present because of Avatar being released so recently, but it's all done so shamelessly and cheaply. I mean, this is a sequel to Ring. Sure, there is a competent modernization of the curse, but the tape has been warped so beyond belief that there's nothing connecting anything to these characters or the ridiculousness of the situation. Everyone is one-dimensional. It's so bad that they clearly went for an entirely new cast for the second film to address this, and thank God there's at least a few instances where this next film can make me feel something. There's an air of mystery, color grading that adds a murkiness to the tone of the film, and much more competently shot all throughout. I really do appreciate the shot composition and the fact that there is some style here. Sadako 3D, despite its complexities, is a much more simpler film narratively when you sit down and enjoy it, but it's just as thematically thin, but at least for some, it's easier for me to follow at least sometimes in the moment. But maybe that's the product of the second film revolving around characters just providing each other exposition about what happened off camera that the audience doesn't even know about, including the fake out involving Nagi not being Sadako's child. But regardless of how impressed I am with the sequel, we're comparing the quality of the film marginally better than its predecessor. Every aspect is so thin in its development, there is poor dialogue. These characters exist as archetypes representative of who would be engaging to interact with in this story. A psychic vessel for Sadako is great, Akane is not. An obsessive fan attempting to bring Sadako back to life is so fascinating, Kashiwada is not. Evolving the tape for the modern day is essential, but have it be all brought down for this is sad. Ring was never a haunted house ghost franchise. It is a film about the pain of a young woman brought out into the world through her psychic abilities, and the attempts of a surrogate father and mother to piece it all together despite their already existing flaws. But no, Sadako is a Spider-Woman, everyone. She's Madam Web of the Ringu cinematic universe, watch out. And as you can already tell, there is an issue with this franchise and the fact that they keep making sequels that keep having characters that keep having to explain the previous films, like they can't trust us to have seen one of the most iconic horror films of all time. Yeah, I'm gonna give Sadako 3D a 2 out of 10, and Sadako 3D 2 a 3 out of 10. I just want to say again, everything about this video is a lot. This is a big gamble. It's a long video. I think some people might have actually tuned out by now, and that's okay. Everybody has their own prerogative. But if you're really enjoying what you're seeing so far, please do share it with people. Please do like, comment, subscribe again, because it really does mean a lot, especially as my page is still growing. We're now taking a brief detour from Japan, now leaving my least favorite continuity ever of mostly poor and bad films, to now talk about the two failed American sequels, The Ring and Rings, two really bad films, but hey, at least I have some nostalgia for these. The Ring 2 sticks out quickly in a wide variety of ways. It is directed by Hideo Nakata, Japanese director of Ring 1 and 2. It's another instance of a Japanese director coming to direct a film in an American remake horror series. Takashi Shimizu did the same thing with The Grudge and Ju-on, which I spoke about in my series of directors remaking their own movie, which you can check out after this. And two, despite Hideo Nakata's previous involvement making the series what it was, this film is a steaming pile of dog due to the involvement of Paramount. Paramount executives would often have Nakata reshoot key scenes of the film or completely alter them to no longer fit Nakata's vision, leading to Nakata almost walking out of the production, but only staying because he respected the cast and then vowing to never make a film in America again. Naomi Watts also did not want to star in the film after reading the very poor script, but she was a hungry artist still after Mulholland Drive and accidentally locked herself in a contractually obligated sequel back when the first film came out. It's also wild to know that Nakata disowned the film, and there is some solid evidence of this in the fact that I've watched a couple of behind-the-scenes featurettes that some have him and some do not, even though I'm looking at these same segments, is really odd. I'm assuming that this is because the film at one time had a VHS and DVD release that was just kind of kept away. There was no HD release. Then all of a sudden Scream Factory, an offshoot of Shout Factory, a boutique label that's kind of similar to Criterion Collection, released their own box set of these Ring films in HD, including some of them in 4K, and I'm assuming that there was an alteration done by the time that this was released. And then when you look at the behind the scenes for the film, none of the actual actors or crew are talking about the film in front of us. They're all talking about that first movie. They're talking about this at a technical level, which is a fantastic sign for the quality of what we're about to see. For those that need a refresher, the film takes place 6 months after the end of the last film. After Rachel's replicated the tape in order to save Aiden's life, legend of the cursed tape spreads as teens and young adults basically make it into a game to experience the tape and show it to someone else before your 7 days is up. In our cold open, we see Jake attempt to share this tape with Emily. His time is on the brink of ending, Emily chickens out, and Samara comes for Jake, and the events of the film begin to really take place. Everything so far is taking place in Astoria, Oregon, which also happens to be where Rachel and Aiden move after the events of The Ring. Rachel learns of what happened and confusingly breaks into Jake's home, steals the videotape, and burns it. At the same time, Aiden is having nightmares of Samara pulling him into the TV as he begins to develop hypothermia and have marks on his body. Aiden starts seeing Samara more. Some deer start slamming all into their car. Aiden is further possessed by Samara, developing a fear of aquaphobia and pushing all the water out of a bathtub until Rachel decides to try and drown Samara in Aiden's body, which to her boss, Max, played by Simon Baker as The Mentalist playing on Tuesdays at 9 p.m. on CBS, looks like Rachel just drowning Aiden, prompting a visit to the hospital. The assumption that Rachel is being a child abuser, she says, "Oh, okay, I guess so," and decides to go on another adventure without Aiden. She then goes to the psychiatric hospital where she meets Evelyn, Samara's mother, who tried to drown her as a child, and tells Rachel to listen to her baby. Samara in Aiden's body starts killing people, including a psychiatrist and also Max, played by Simon Baker as The Mentalist playing on Tuesdays at 9 p.m. on CBS, and Rachel is shocked to see how sweet Aiden is and is told after falling asleep by an astral projecting Aiden to perform an exorcism. Rachel then drugs Samara, then begins to drown her to free Aiden before Samara appears on the TV, who then drags Rachel in, who willingly allows herself to be inside the tape. Rachel then drags herself out of the well, shuts it closed so Samara can't get out, jumps off the same cliff where Samara's adopted mother lost her life, and then returns happily ever after to Aiden, or we can assume so. And all I can say about this is what nonsensical bull. The entire film hinges on Rachel acting beyond out of character and intervening again in the affairs of Samara. Aside from the film feeling like a collection of scenes with no cohesion, it's also a film that leans so hard into the strengths of the first film that they appear to be weaknesses upon return because all of our characters regress. There's suddenly no sign that Rachel and Aiden's relationship has repaired. There is no sign that Rachel has suddenly become a much better mother. She's just the same character, except a bit more worse and a bit more obnoxious, and also a bit more unbelievable in terms of, oh my god, why are you drowning your son? But there's also the choice to focus on Aiden as a character and his psychic link to Samara, which admittedly is the only new aspect of the narrative here, and it's by far the strongest idea here, but collapses as soon as you realize that there is no natural endpoint for any of this. It's also a film that appears very flat, removing the green filter, removing the unique visual identity that the film has, and also focusing on so many close-ups of these characters, making a film that struggles to manage its scale while also being so claustrophobic. And when the family element is brought up with such importance in our first entry, it's challenging to sit with a film that separates Rachel and Aiden for as long as they do, especially when Aiden was also possessed by Samara for so long. It's just thematically empty. It's a hall of mirrors, gazing upon familiar tropes, never forging its own identity, and even though it's American production, has so many similar issues as the other Japanese sequels. It becomes a standard ghost movie and a haunted house film the second you remove that tape and forget to give this film any sense of identity. For the longest time, I've wanted this film to get a sequel, but as I get older, that's reflective of my relationship to Aiden and Rachel in that first film, not the pale imitation of the characters that we get here. Bad movie. I'm giving Ring 2 a 3 out of 10. It's Rings time, everyone. We're here. We did it. We're at the absolute depths of the franchise, and it can only go up from here. The 2017 entry is a shocking one for many reasons. It is the first American adaptation of Spiral, so you have an idea of where this is going narratively. Originally titled The Ring 3D in the grand old year of 2014, far past the time and the trend that any studio should be doing that, but was retitled Rings at some point in the script rewriting phase. Now here's a wonky fact that I did not know about this film. It started filming on March 23rd, 2015 and ended on March 31st of that same year, a very normal shoot time, but the film was expected to release in November that year, was pulled off the calendar, rescheduled for April 1st, 2016, pulled again for October 28th, 2016, then believed to have been pulled again off the calendar to no longer compete with Ouija Origin of Evil, a sign of absolute confidence in what this film actually was, and then it came out eventually on February 3rd, 2017, a prime time for a horror release. I'm kidding. What are they doing? But hey, they did that viral video where Samara crawled out of a TV and scared a bunch of people in an electronics store, and that got 200 million views in 24 hours. I'm sure this translates to real success. Okay. Let's talk about what happens in this movie. We open in 2013 on a plane going to Seattle. Carter and Kelly talk about seeing Samara's cursed tape, and Carter's like, bro, I forgot to copy the tape, and then Samara crawls through the front computer of the plane and then brings down the entire plane, killing everybody on board. 2 years later, a college professor named Gabriel gets a hold of Carter's tape, while at the same time, Julia sends her boyfriend Holt off to college before being contacted by Sky, Gabriel's partner, about concern for Holt. This leads to Julia going to Holt's school and learning of a cult named the Sevens, a group known for experimenting on the cursed videotape, having everyone watch the tape before planning for someone else to see the footage to break their connection to the curse, and the person who watches the tape after you is called a tail here. Julia going with Sky, where she is unknowingly about to be exposed to the cursed tape, prompts Julia to lock herself in the closet while Sky's face gets stretched by Samara. Samara clearly shows an interest in Julia, but we can't think about that for too long due to Holt appearing and revealing that he only has 12 hours left, leading to Julia watching the film. And then when receiving her phone call, also getting a vision of a door, and then the phone burns a mark into her hand. Going back to Gabriel for advice, we also learn that Julia's tape can't be copied and has additional imagery, leading to one of the worst games of telephone on the planet, as Julia can't describe what is on the tape when others try to avert their gaze, and they then believe that they have to cremate Samara. If it wasn't clear at this point, this film doesn't make much sense as a sequel to either American Ring movie, either rehashing various plot points, changing mythology, or having random retcons in order to justify a sequel, but when has continuity ever mattered for a horror franchise? Gabriel scans Julia's hand to try and understand what is wrong, but not before Julia and Holt are instructed to go to Sacrament Valley, where Samara has been buried after the people of her town did not want to bury her, but when coming across her tomb, they find it empty. Galen Burke, a local blind man, which is very important for later, shares that Samara's body had to be reburied. Gabriel is alarmed by a discovery that he finds about Julia's hand and that the mark left behind is Braille. But on his way to Sacrament Valley, he gets into a car accident and is skewered by a utility pole. Grim stuff. Too bad I don't care about this man. We then learn a bit more about Samara, essentially that her mother was assaulted by a priest, held captive while pregnant for 8 months, and then escaping. It is then revealed that Galen was the priest and he blinded himself in order to escape Samara's wrath. After a brief scuffle, it's revealed that Samara's remains are chained behind the wall, with Galen believing the destruction of her physical body would cause the destruction of the planet. This causes a swarm of cicadas to appear, Samara to crawl out of Julia's phone, heal Galen's eyesight, which to be fair, she's done before. She's done it. It's happened. Kill Galen, and then they help cremate this lady. When Julia goes home to shower, Holt recognizes the voicemail on his phone where Gabriel's revealed that the braille on Julia's hand says rebirth, simultaneously overlapping with Julia coughing out black hair and a cicada, everyone in Julia's contact list to be sent her version of the cursed tape, and Samara appearing in Julia's reflection, implying that she is now reborn inside of Julia. And we will never again see any of these people in any iteration of this franchise. And I also want to make this clear. I hate this movie. No characters have an ounce of personality here. We retread lots of familiar territory due to unnecessary retcons, and while there is much more random nature to Sadako's attacks in Razin and beyond after the events of Ring, it's far too abrupt and unbelievable that she would take down an entire airplane just to ignore the rules for her first kill. It's a film that's just a slog, having so many false starts, first having this cold open, then introducing Gabriel, then introducing Julia and Holt, and then having Julia finally get to Holt's school and then reveal the tape roughly 40 minutes in. it is a sluggish mess that even has this ugly green look, likely due to the poor color grading through digital editing rather than the physical lens from the first movie. And there's also an attempt to integrate Christian imagery instead of the more vague otherworldly elements of the American films, making a movie that's really unequipped to handle its own subject matter. And the lack of cohesion means that we get random scenes sewn together with no fabric bounding them. The vast majority of the scares are just flat. They are laughable. Again, Samara takes down a passenger plane and we're all just supposed to accept that this is her world now. It's a film that is an uninspired mess, pulling from so many inspirations and never having a single aspect land. It's a largely incoherent film. No element of it comes together technically. None of the decisions of the logic of any of these characters are existent, and it's void of any personality or tension. I am clearly beating a dead horse here. Rings is the easiest 1 out of 10 I could give for this franchise. Looking at the previous two timelines in the series, there's pretty consistent issues between both, which is the inability to manage the tone needed for a successful Ring film, becoming narratively or thematically repetitive, even when attempting to progress the larger narrative and have our characters evolve, and adapting Rosin or Spiral, a very well-received book, but a novel adapted by filmmakers who are not nearly as adept or advanced to cover material that takes on the expansion of Samara as a being who is attempting to find a new body, and from a filmmaking standpoint, being unable to navigate the lack of any cursed tape to create any real progression. And I do think somehow, some way, there is a way to create a fantastic adaptation of that novel, and maybe that will somehow be my life's work in the future. But for now, let's talk about how the failures to adapt that novel led to Hideo Nakata's return to the Ring franchise with Ring 2. Again, a film that only existed because the original sequel was so poor, it was disregarded, and they said, let's continue the story that the audience loves. And while the majority of situations like this, I would say this is misguided, it also leads to a largely solid selection of films within this timeline, and 3 films I would easily throw on in a marathon after Ring. To start off these films, Ring 2, released in 1999, takes place 4 weeks after the event of the first film, and starts with Sadako's uncle, Takashi, being called by the police to identify her body and providing a burial at sea after learning that Sadako survived for 30 years inside the well. The police are now looking for Reiko and Yuichi after the death of Ryuji and also Reiko's father, who is also shown the tape to spare Yuichi. This all leads to Mai Takano, who we last saw in Spiral, and Reiko's work colleague Okazaki to go search for answers, which leads to the recurrence of the cursed tape. A high schooler attempts to have Okazaki watch the tape in order to end her experience with the curse, which causes him to be too afraid to actually watch the tape. Mai then decides to go look for Mazami, a friend of Reiko's niece, the same one that passed away at the beginning of the first film, who is now in a psychiatric ward after witnessing Reiko's niece's death, is mute, and is also fearful of television sets, where she's also having her psychic energy drawn out by Dr. Kawajiri. When Mai encounters Mazami, this causes Sadako to appear and horrify everyone who witnesses her. This makes Mai understand Sadako's presence has been connected to those with a psychic link, and while in the case of Mazami actually conjured her fear into Sadako, causing an immediate fear popping up about Yuichi potentially doing the same. Mai ends up finding Reiko and Yuichi as the latter's psychic abilities have amplified after his father and grandfather's deaths. As everyone's paths begin to converge, the police become aware of Mai's contact with Reiko, and as Mai, Okazaki, and a detective watch Kawajiri attempt to have Mazami project her psychic powers onto a blank tape, accidentally recreate that tape and leading Mai to destroy it. The detective attempts to torture Mai to get Reiko and Yuichi's location, leading to Mai providing a psychic warning to Yuichi. In his attempt to flee and psychically attack the cops, Reiko is killed in a hit and run. Mai and Yuichi end up going to Oshima Island, and after staying at an inn, Yuichi has a nightmare and accidentally conjures the ghosts of Sadako and her mother Shizuku. After being able to escape them, Dr. Kawajiri joins them and attempts to exorcise Yuichi with the goal of putting Sadako's spirit into a swimming pool in order to neutralize her hatred, only to accidentally summon Sadako's coffin, with Takashi and Kawajiri jumping into the pool, killing themselves due to the electrical equipment involved. Mai and Yuichi end up following inside the pool, appear inside the well, only to encounter Ryuji's ghost. He's able to absorb Yuichi's fear and summons a rope that allows Mai to escape as long as she does not look down. Sadako begins to then following them, crawling up the wall and asking, why is it only you who are saved? And ending with Yuichi and Mai outside the pool with no fear. The film then ends with Okazaki institutionalized, and when a nurse takes his picture, notices Kane's spirit haunting him. The ending here is a little confusing for some, likely the most unclear and open ending for the entire franchise. Some may view it as contrived, others may see it as speaking to Sadako's warped soul shaped by hatred condemning her to a personal hell in the water, as the curse lives on through someone else, with that evil being so persistent and unflinching in the world, and just so radiant throughout this entire film as well. And even though the film is not nearly as terrifying or even focused on fear as much as Ring, it still makes for a film that's effective and gripping, even if many of the elements are not fully realized. There is, however, quite the contrast in the quality of our main characters, which only becomes apparent when we have the reintroduction of Reiko and Yuichi, and the former's abrupt departure from the series is a disappointment in every regard, even as someone who does not believe in fan service being an aspect of thought considering a film. There really aren't any qualities that are outstanding here, nor any terrible. It's a very middle-of-the-road, conventional, and safe sequel in this franchise that stands in comparison with Spiral as a much stronger film. But when we think about the greatest of horror franchises that start with a masterpiece and immediately are followed by a film of much lesser quality, living in the shadow of its predecessor but not quite failing in its existence, Ring 2 is a movie that falls in line with those type of horror sequels. There can be an argument for some that this film gets very little right aside from its tone and its atmosphere, and for me, that's honestly good enough compared to the other films. I'm going to give this movie a 6 out of 10. Of the 14 films in this franchise, only one grew considerably in my appreciation as I came to rewatch the films, which was the 2000 Ring prequel Ring Zero Birthday, which was adapted from a short story titled Lemon Heart in the Birthday Anthology book, or the fourth book in the Ring series, choosing to focus on Sadako's life before she experienced tragedy. Directed by Noria Sarada, a director who sadly does not have a notable reputation at all in the contemporary sense, and I say that with no judgment, this is par for the course, but was chosen after Nakata turned down the film and because of Sarada's history making direct-to-video horror films. He also viewed the story of Sadako as a tragedy and wanted to shift the film from a psychological horror film to a psychological thriller, being inspired by the late 90s Hollywood movies, including those by David Fincher, and while a genre that's been explored by a number of Japanese directors, including Satoshi Kon and Kiyoshi Kurosawa, it was a genre that not many directors in the region were familiar with at the time, and the same could be said explicitly about Sarada too. It's a film that was released as a double feature with a J-horror film titled Isola, was one of the first psychological thrillers in the early 2000s in Japan to ever gross 1 billion yen, and a film that is constantly compared to Carrie because, yeah, it's just like Carrie. The film opens with two teenage girls discussing the tape, with one sharing that she has nightmares about the death of Sadako by Dr. Akuma, before the film flashes back 30 years prior. We briefly follow Miyagi, the fiancé of a reporter killed by Shizuko's ESP demonstration from years before, interviewing one of Sadako's early teachers, helping to understand more about her psychic powers, which made Sadako withdrawn and had a vision where all of her classmates would drown in the ocean during a field trip, which happened somehow. At the same time, Sadako is 19 and has gone and joined an acting troupe as an understudy, one of the most shocking turns for this series. Her natural talent bothers the lead of this play, who dies from a woman in a mysterious white dress that looks like Sadako. What follows is a bit of romantic messiness between Sadako, the troupe sound director, and a costume designer named Etsuko that longs for this troupe sound director. But all you really need to know is that everyone hates Sadako except for a handful of new friends. As Miyagi photographs Sadako, her camera breaks and there's a reveal of a ghostly girl in the photographs, confirming the reality that there are two Sadakos, a good one and a bad one. Yeah, I don't know, man. I'm just reading the summary. This is insane. Shigemori, the director for the troupe, reveals that he is obsessed with Sadako, causing her to accidentally kill him and injure the troupe sound director Toyama, leading Sadako to heal him before healing a disabled man, which again is a power that we only ever see in Rings. Etsuko decides to play the recording of Sadako's mom's demonstration, leading her to accidentally kill the psychiatrist. The troupe then finds Shigemori's body, and then they decide to beat Sadako to death. Continuing a baffling retcon for this franchise, the troupe decides to go on a hunt for the second Sadako, leading to Dr. Akuma revealing that the two Sadakos are split up into a kind half resembling her mother and a malevolent evil half resembling her father, making this commentary about caring mothers and a distant father at the forefront more so than any other film in the series, but also tacked in on the end, and also who cares because it's time for the two Sadakos to fuse. This Sadako then kills every single one of the troupe members, including Toyama, except for Miyagi and Etsuko, with the former shooting the latter to save themselves. This all leads to Sadako regretting her actions as Akuma drugs her, strikes her with an axe, and she tumbles down the well as the film ends. It is likely clear for anyone at home who's seen this film or hasn't that regardless of what you think about this movie, it is a nightmare in terms of how this has needlessly convoluted the story of Sadako in many ways that have never mattered, will never matter for future entries, directly contradict the previous film, and confusingly makes Sadako a character that isn't morally gray or tragic, and how she morphs into a creature creature more monstrous through her hatred after being more innocent in another life. She instead just becomes a character made of two halves who actually became evil because the actions of a scared microcosm of the public, but also her evil self did in fact kill someone early on in the film. Ring, by the form of romantic thriller, is not at all what I expect with Ring Zero Birthday, and there's little mystery to connect us to this film. It's the inherent flaw of the prequels, although great prequels exist, so the twists and the turns are shaped by everything between the beginning and the end, leading to again a needlessly convoluted film. The care that I feel for Sadako in the end was shaped by the events of the previous films, Reiko's ability to see through the horror and have a real moment of empathy, or Yukiya Nakama's performance of the character who really does so much with this material that again is really confusing. It's a shocking blend of melodrama, camp, and horror, and rarely succeeds at the latter, and while being very watchable, it's the beginning point for the Japanese films losing their identity, and thank God the next one corrects it. I'll give this one a 5.5 out of 10. Hideo Nakata's return to the franchise 19 years later for Sadako is a shocking turn of events. Maybe not considering he's the godfather of this film series, but definitely when considering the modern state of the Japanese series and the fact that Rings has absolutely ended the possibility of an American entry for the extended future. To come back and bring Hideo Nakata into the fold both feels incredibly safe in placating an audience and incredibly risky for one last Hail Mary, for now at least, in this franchise. Maybe more shocking for me at this point, I cannot find a single press release announcing the production of this film. I can just find one announcing the fact that the trailer has come out. Sure, we can guess that this movie was made in decision to adapt Tide, which had come out 3 years prior, but I have no conclusive evidence, which is odd, but likely speaks to the health of the Ring franchise, and maybe what little faith there was in these films at this point. To dive into this film, we have the single strongest opening and maybe seen in a Japanese film in this franchise since Ring 2, as we see a clairvoyant Hatsuko preparing to set a closet that is locked on fire with her daughter inside because of the belief that she is the reincarnation of Sadako. Because of this, Sadako's ghost breaks free from her cave and appears in the apartment with this young girl as Hatsuko is mortified before we get our title card. We then transition to our main location for the film, Kurakawa General Memorial Hospital, as we follow Dr. Mayu Akikawa, who is examining this young girl. She's found on the streets after she claims to have witnessed a ghost jumping off a bridge, and then we learn that she survived the apartment fire, but it also claimed 5 lives. They're also unable to identify her due to a lack of public record, and learning that her mother actually kept her existence secret and had only spoken to her using the name Sadako. In order to modernize this entry of the series, a portion of the story is dedicated to Dr. Akikawa's brother Kazuma, a social media personality who wants to get his audience reinterested in his content, so he decides to investigate this apartment fire. As we go back and forth with our two storylines, this young Sadako is bullied by her young companions in this hospital, leading her to telekinetically roll a cart at these children and only stopping when having another vision, then sharing about her time in her mother's closet before fainting as she sees the ghost of Sadako in a TV reflection. Kazuma has gone missing during his apartment visit, prompting Mayu to look more into this young girl's home. Long story short, we do get a sudden appearance of the videotape with the well and grabs Mayu, causing her to faint and dream about her experience of the young Sadako in her closet. After connecting knowledge about the cursed tape in Sadako's home of Oshima Island, they decide to travel there, coming across a woman in a cave who names that the unwanted babies are abandoned at a shrine in order for Sadako to feast on their souls. We then get all sorts of exposition about the first movie. An apparition of the young girl reappears inside the cave, causing Mayu to attempt to save her. She is then surrounded by the bones of babies, which is grisly stuff, and Kazuma sacrifices himself to save his sister. Mayu then recovers in the hospital as this young girl is discharged, thanking her for her help, and it's all for nothing as Sadako comes to claim Mayu's life. And as I reflect on this film and my enjoyment of it, it has the inverse problem as Ring Zero, whereas in that film so many of its possibilities are closed off due to the nature of the film having a predetermined ending, leading to a film that is unnecessarily confusing as it tries to find new hooks for an audience to grasp onto. Sadako is a film that opens up the world to possibilities of the virus that ultimately fell flat. We have immediate and overwhelming tension, seeing the promised reincarnation of Sadako not cloaked in mystery around her identity, with the quick reveal of the older Sadako protecting her is a striking image and simultaneously connects itself to the first film thematically, tonally, and narratively that I think not a single other film has done in the franchise aside from Ring 2 and Zero, while also being faithful to the ideas present in the sequel novels, specifically reincarnation and the curse appearing in new forms, which to me also exists as a thoughtful commentary on legacy sequels as a whole with this young Sadako. It's a film that, while starting off exceptionally strong in its first act before it all simply falls apart, ultimately needing to spend large amounts of time again retreading its past, reintroducing its audience to a key story that we all know because of some fear about who the audience was coming into this. It's a safe safety either shaped by this fear or this inability for Nakata to rise to the occasion here, but regardless, Sadako's tragic tale quickly turns into a haunted house ghost story that we have seen with so many of these films before in these recent iterations of Sadako. It's all just a shame. This could have been a springboard in so many ways. It's not a bad film by any means, but one that fizzles out rather than lifts the film out of the depths. Not the worst score, thankfully. I can comfortably give Sadako a 6 out of 10. Now, there is a weird trend here that happened with our two final entries in the Ring series. They both rely on little connection to the previous films, including one discarding the mythology of Ring entirely, and both going the route of another familiar franchise involving an orange-haired doll, which was shifting the films from horror to horror comedy, and in one of these cases, making a move that for some would be bold at the height of their popularity, coming across as tired and sad as these franchises have whimpered, which, while I haven't seen the entirety of the Ju-on series yet, feels the case for it. This all leads us to Sadako vs. Kayako, a 2016 film hinted as an April Fool's Day joke the year before, and then suddenly was real. Directed by Koji Shiraishi, best known for making literally dozens of found footage horror films in Japan, likely best known for directing Noroi the Cursed and Occult, and with the arrival of a director of this caliber, easily the largest profile director entering the film's production. I mean, even Hideo Nakata was not big until after that first film's release. There's little I can say about this film's production when combing through the few behind the scenes footage or interviews I can find. There was definitely a big blowout with promotion and marketing when attempting to make this a big film, including a baseball game with Sadako and Kayako. I've seen stray comments online about Koji Shiraishi not receiving the support or independence he wanted to make the film, which I cannot validate or find the source for, but I do believe it considering the notable quality of this film, which is bad. For those that are not aware of the disappointment that was Sadako vs. Kayako, the film opens with an elderly care worker coming across one of her clients deceased with a cord around her neck when suddenly the curse tape plays and Sadako kills her instantly. Wait, what? The VCR ends up in a pawn shop where several college students, Yuri and Natsumi, purchase it, find the tape, play it, and then they see a dilapidated building, but Yuri gets distracted by her phone and only Natsumi ends up finishing it, leading to a phone call that says that Natsumi has 2 days. Okay, none of this feels lore accurate now. And just so you all know, it's going to stay that way. A worker from the store where the two women got the cursed tape from leaps from his death, prompting them to coincidentally go to their professor of urban legends, who is eager to meet Sadako, so he then watches the tape out of his own free will before guiding them to an exorcist, which then leads to Sadako possessing Natsumi, killing their professor and the assistants of the exorcist, as the exorcist in his last dying breath instructs the women to go see a man named Keizo. After Natsumi and Yuri have a fight, Yuri decides to watch the tape to spread the curse, which Keizo names did nothing, with Yuri needlessly cursing herself. By the way, Keizo is with a blind psychic girl named Tamao. That is important for later. After Natsumi questionably uploads the tape to the internet, Natsumi decides to take her own life, but is unsuccessful after Sadako decides to hang her herself, and Keizo names that the only way that they can beat Sadako is to have her fight another vengeful spirit, and this is where Kayako comes in. We are now introduced to Suzuka, a high school student living near the Psyche house, where Kayako and Toshio lost their lives. Suzuka feels compelled to enter the home, and Keizo and Tamao say don't do it. Some bullies do though, and they all meet violent ends, even with Toshio taking out the head of one of them. Suzuka thinks she sees a schoolboy inside and accidentally gets cursed by Toshio, leading to a plan where Suzuka will see the tape inside the home, and Yuri will see Kayako, and the spirits will fight over the two women. Foolproof in every way, I know. We're rapidly approaching the conclusion of our film as Sadako, Kayako, and Toshio duel it out, raising the stakes of everything that we've seen before, but it feels like we're drawing towards a stalemate as neither supernatural being can overcome each other, so Keizo suggests that one of the girls trick the two specters to go inside the cursed tape and become trapped inside the well. Yuri decides to make the sacrifice and it all backfires, leading to the creation of Sadakaya, who has possessed Yuri and begins to terrorize Tamao and Suzuka before we're left with an open ending that 9 years later still does not have a conclusion or follow-up and will likely never get one. To describe Sadako vs. Kayako as a disappointment is an understatement, never quite being funny enough to earn being a comedy, and most frustratingly, choosing to shift and warp the mythology of two of the most iconic beings in all of Japanese horror in order to form a compromise that is not truthful to either film and also cannot maintain any tension to save the movie. I simply do not care for any of these characters, and despite the initial premise and the promise brought on by that fight that takes place, or at least the beginning of it, these crossover films exist purely as fan service, and for a film for the fans, so much of the time is spent on retreading old ground and retelling us lore that's been remixed, but does any of this need to be changed in the first place? Why can't the first film from each franchise be canon here at least, just so that we don't have to have everything explained? Making both series exist as reboots almost eliminates the possibility of these films functioning as fan service, even if the film is inherently this. There is nothing fun here, there is nothing deep, these characters are just pale imitations of the ones we love. Many versus cash grabs exist that disappoint dearly, and Sadako versus Kayako is one of the worst. I'm giving it a 3 out of 10. Finally, we're at our latest entry in the series, and my final film for this video, thank God, 2022's Sadako DX. Directed by Hisashi Kimura, a director with little notable under his belt, there are more bare press announcements providing details. You get the idea, you get the gist. They're just slinging gunk at the wall here. It's a horror comedy. Only the first movie is canon. Oh no, I guess we're just gonna have to jump in the film and not get a proper intro. Introducing Akaya, a prodigy with a 200 IQ, who learns of a new variant of the cursed tape from a psychic, Master Kenshin, which kills people in not 7 days but now 24 hours, and Akaya thinks this is bull. Her sister Futaba watches the tape, learns that it's all from the POV of Sadako, and shortly after, Futaba starts seeing everyone in her life as Sadako. To abbreviate the story as much as I can, Akaya and company end up watching the tape, with Master Kenshin from before believing that he has ended the curse through an exorcism, and Akaya remaining a skeptic. Akaya ends up doing more research and interacts with a man simply known as Condon, a germaphobe who's also been studying the tape and believes it to be connected to smallpox, which leads them to believe, after learning of the survival of someone who'd seen the tape 24 hours earlier, leading them to hypothesize that showing the tape to someone else is like being vaccinated, with eventually enough people seeing the tape and its effects becoming non-lethal. This then leads Akaya and Futaba to convince their mother to watch the tape, and Akaya to share the tape on the World Wide Web. Fantastic idea. Kenshin reveals that he is secretly an entertainer and that spreading the curse would bring him viewership for his new show before dropping dead and proving this curse to not be so different from the ones that we knew before. Upon reckoning that Sadako wanted the tape shared, they then find Condon in full gear protecting himself from the world, and then when trying to solve this mystery as a group, Akaya realizes that showing off the film to others is not saving them, it's viewing the film every 24 hours as individuals doing so. We then see some hilarious hijinks as Sadako begins to haunt everyone as they fail miserably navigating their attempts to see the film by a 24-hour mark, and without a doubt this is one of the worst final entries in a horror franchise ever made. Defaulting to poor comedy is just a shame, and while Child's Play did this previously, it was leading to an existing camp in the franchise. This is just turning Ring into a self-parody, but doing that implies a self-aware nature about what this franchise is or what these films are, and none of that is present here. It's not at all that funny. It is characters chasing each other in circles for again a version of Sadako that is so far removed from her greatness. Talking about these characters in this way, it just makes it painfully clear that they're all just retreading the same territory. There's not much to say about this. I just want to give this movie a 2 out of 10 and end it here. Despite how painful it was to do this entire journey twice for a video, I still find myself loving Ring as a franchise, drawn to the horrible tragedy of Sadako and the wrath created from it. It's why I felt so invested in the lore and the presentation of everything we received. It's challenging to reckon with that as a fan as well, considering the fact that when you hold on to some excitement for whatever next entries pop up in a series, they're always going to be a far cry from everything that you found yourself caring for. Ring is also bound by the technology of the VHS tape. Any modernizations show off a glimmer of hope that fades away into the emptiness of space as we're just left wondering and wanting to watch his original few films rather than many of the modern ones that we come across. I also know that if this franchise comes back, I will be there without a question, hoping that that filth and grime that shaped this entire franchise returns in all of its glory. For now, let's stop here. I need a hard break, but if you enjoy this, like, comment, subscribe, follow me elsewhere, see other videos. This took a lot out of me. This was supposed to be my second of my Halloween videos. It's now almost Thanksgiving. I'm beat. I'm going to do a couple of videos for December and kind of pause, well, not take a break, just kind of slow things a little bit down as we go into 2026. This is the first video that nearly broke me, so I hope that some of you are still here. If not, you know, this was a costly mistake and I'll learn, but otherwise this is James. Take care. I'll see you all next time.